Maggie, welcome to Art and Cocktails. I am so unbelievably honored to have you on the show. I will tell you a fun story. I had jury duty in March and I just grabbed a book off my shelf and it happened to be your book, your memoir. And I was so happy I was at jury duty because I could just binge. I pretty much read the whole thing that afternoon. And so thank you for writing it. And then you have a brand new book out. Congratulations, dear writer, which has so many incredible tools and lessons for the creative life. So I can't wait to jump in and talk about it. Welcome to the show.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's so kind. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm so excited. So before we dive in, for those who may not be familiar with your work, I'm sure many are. I know when I told a few of my friends that you're coming on the show, many already knew who you were and were huge fans. But for those who may be newer to your work, could you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm primarily a poet. I think that's probably how most people know me. But I also publish books of prose and picture books and work in other genres. But I'm a writer and a teacher and sometimes an editor and a Midwesterner.
I love that. Well, I am really grateful for the work that you're doing. And before we dive in, I would love to hear a little bit about you kind of coming up on your creative path because I feel like both writing and art is this kind of opaque, obscure. There's no like manual or career ladder that we go on. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit about how you knew you wanted to commit your life to writing and being a creative.
Yeah, I mean, I joke, but it's pretty much true that writing is the only thing I'm really good at. I think if you can find the thing that you're both you have a knack for, but also that makes you feel most like yourself, that's the thing you should keep doing, whether you make a living at it or not. It is incredibly surprising to me at my age now that I make a living doing the thing that makes me feel most like myself, which is writing books. I know I'd be doing it even if it was a side gig. So I think probably by the time I was in college, like my late teens, early 20s, I knew I'd be writing poems for the rest of my life. I had no idea how I would pay my bills, but I knew I would be writing poems. And so it's sort of like a grand mystery and surprise that after doing it and having 9 to 5 jobs or freelance gigs or whatever for many years, that now it's gotten to the point where I primarily write.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Do you have any tips for someone who may be earlier on their journey and they want to commit their life to art or writing or creative practice, but maybe the voices are like, well, this isn't practical. How is this going to work? Especially for those who might be working a day job and maybe they don't love the day job. Do you have any encouragement for those moments where you're like, I know I love this, but life kind of sucks at the moment?
I do. It's funny. I mean, it is in some ways impractical, right? To try to carve out a life in the arts. And I mean, like as an analogous story, my son, who's 12, recently said that he wanted to be a professional soccer player when he grows up. And so it's funny, even though I do what I do for a living, I found myself, like I heard myself say to him, that's fairly unlikely. Like, I think it's great. Like, keep going. You're talented. You're good at it. Practice hard, but like, you're probably going to get a different kind of job when you're older because it's maybe like 0.00 whatever percent of kids who love soccer at age 12 and become professional athletes. And he looked at me, and the next thing out of his mouth was, yeah, that's probably exactly what you thought about being a poet, right? And I thought, oh my gosh, I don't actually know if I'm setting a positive or negative example, by which I mean, I don't know if I'm setting a realistic example because it is unusual to be a self-employed poet. Um, and so I like it is kind of a tricky path. And I had a day job for many years. I mean, I've been self-employed for about 14 years now. But before that, I had a day job. I worked a 9 to 5, and I chose that. I actually chose after getting an MFA to get a 9 to 5 job instead of going into academia. And the reason I did that is because I could leave the 9 to 5 job at, 4:30 in the afternoon and write at night and not have class prep or student emails or any, grading, any of that other stuff to do in the evenings. So I'm well aware that sometimes it can be frustrating to have a day job and really want to invest all of your time in your creative pursuits, but it's also puts an enormous amount of pressure on your creative pursuits to ask them to pay your rent and your electricity and your water, your mortgage and your car insurance and all those other things. And that can put you into an actually like a different relationship with your art
Yeah.
making. And so maybe counterintuitively from how I live my life, I would probably advise most people to keep the day job and remind yourself that the hours that you're not there are the hours that you get to spend on your creative work. And if the time comes, or when, if you want to be optimistic, the time comes that that is something that will support you, then you can always flex down or leave. But I do I find myself being incredibly Midwestern practical and, and like saying like I know you love this, but like how sustainable is it in the long run? Like, does it, I mean, I don't have health insurance from poetry. So like there are real benefits to having a steady gig and then using the time around it to do your creative work.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing. And I'm self-employed for 9 years now, and I always promise myself not to put pressure on my fine art because that created a negative relationship with my work. And the other thing is I always said I would never shame myself if I have to go back because I just
Yeah.
wanted to see if I could do it, you know? And there are days like last week where I told my boyfriend, I'm like, I think I'm just gonna get a normal job. And he's like, what would you even do?
That's a very good question. I mean, I talk about this all the time. Like, I don't, maybe I'd go back to school and do
Yeah.
something completely different. But I mean, when my kids, people ask my kids all the time because they're, adolescents and teenagers now, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I'm so annoyed by people who ask teenagers those kinds of questions because how should they know? Like, they shouldn't know. And frankly, I'm still figuring out what I want to
Same.
not when I grow up, but as I grow up. And my professional life now doesn't look like it did 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. Like, sometimes books take up more time, sometimes teaching takes up more time, sometimes editorial work or speaking gigs or whatever. Many of us cobble a life together in lots of different ways, and some years look different from others. And I totally agree with that. No shame in like recalibrating and being
Yeah.
like, actually, I think it would be better for my nervous system to do
Yeah.
something else.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing and for being honest about that. I feel the same way. And I think also normalizing that most creatives, even like, let's say, like even celebrities, they're not just making money off their music. They have like perfume lines and clothing. And even though they're known for their craft, I think it's okay if we don't put all of the emphasis financially on our craft because especially for longer projects. Like I imagine, writing a book or spending time in a collection of poems, it's going to take time. You don't want to rush it. And then that's not going to really help financially anyway. Like I know for me with my paintings, if I rush through that, that's not going to be a good body of work. So thank you so much for normalizing that. I'm
Cool.
curious to hear about your experience. I know you probably get this question all the time, but about your poem, Good Bones, when it started to really pick up. Where were you at in your life and your creative career at that time? And what was that experience like to suddenly just see your name everywhere and your work on such a public level?
It was incredibly surreal because it was, I mean, it's been almost 10 years. It was 2016, the first time that poem went sort of wildly viral. And at that time, I think my kids were 3 and 6 and were in like kindergarten and part-time daycare. So what I was doing with most of my hours was pushing a stroller around my neighborhood. um and like watching Paw Patrol. So I live in Columbus, Ohio. So I really was like sort of 80% Midwestern mom of young children who was self-employed and worked from home, but working from home at that time meant working during the hours my son was napping or had, preschool a couple days a week. So it wasn't that I was living this like high profile literary life when that happened. I was very much like folding tiny socks most of the time. And so having it was kind of like lightning striking because I had published two books at that point. So I wasn't new to writing or to literature or to publishing, but it was a very different scale. I'm very used to it. At that point, I was very used to being read mostly by poets because poets read poetry. And that poem going viral um, made, like, if not my name, at least the poem's title
Hmm.
really well known among people who weren't, quote unquote, poetry people. So like musicians and actors and, chefs and celebrities and people like, news anchors, people that definitely had no idea who I was the day before that happened. Was incredibly strange and from an art making perspective, really disorienting because I had to quickly pivot and figure out how to keep making things in the wake
Mm,
of that happening. Because the beauty of writing poetry, generally speaking, and I think, probably most visual art too, is that it kind of exists outside of capitalism. Like
hmm.
you're taking your time, you're making it for you. You're making choices based on your own aesthetic. You're not thinking about what like the quote unquote consumer wants,
Hmm.
because that's not the nature of the gig. And so suddenly I thought, oh my gosh, I've got all these eyes on me and expectations
Yeah, I was
that
gonna
I,
ask you about that. Did anything come up for you? Because I know, like, and not at that level, obviously, but even when something happens, you're like, oh my gosh, can I recreate this success and this new pressure? Curious to hear if you had an experience like that with yourself.
yeah, I mean, I had to kind of sit down and have a conversation with myself about it because for the first time I felt like there were people who were paying attention and part of me was like, well, how do I not let them down? Like I can't recreate that poem. Like there's not going to be Good Bones 2. And I wouldn't even know how to recreate it. Like every poem, just like every painting, right, is a one-off. It is sort of a mystery to me how these things even happen, like where an
Hmm.
idea comes from and how it all gets put together. It often feels like a poem is happening to me, not that I'm making it happen. And so I thought, well, I don't want to have a different kind of relationship with my writing. I don't want to feel like I'm making things for people. Like I don't want to go into sort of product mode
Yeah.
or branding mode or whatever that is that just felt gross to me at the time. And so I realized that the best thing I could do for my art making was to pretend that that never happened. And so I just kind of I had to say, okay, let's pretend that poem never went viral. Let's pretend, it's like the old cliche, like the dance like no one is watching. I really had to write like no one was watching. And so the poems I wrote right after Good Bones went viral were, I wrote one about a stone. I wrote one about a stick. Like I really tried to go as granular as possible to resist actively any temptation I might have to sort of live up to what I thought reader expectations might be and to kind of keep it as pure as possible for myself.
That's brilliant advice. Thank you for sharing that. I think with art is the same. And especially when artists start to get a little bit of taste of like sales or money or commissions, and it's this temptation to start producing this thing. It becomes like a product and it kind of does take the magic out of it. Not that there's anything wrong with client work if that's how people support themselves, but in terms of fine art and art
Yeah.
practice, I really love that. Now, in your memoir, you mentioned how maybe there was a little bit of like jealousy or, non-supportiveness, as I would like to call it, from maybe family and friends at the time. Could you talk about navigating that? Did you experience, and I know you kind of wrote a little bit about really personal writing in your memoir, But how did you navigate maybe when people didn't seem happy for you or your success as your career started to grow? Because that definitely has happened, I think, to most of us. And or even in the initial early stages when you're so excited and you're getting committed to your craft, and then all of a sudden someone tries to shoot you down or ignore you altogether. I was
It's
wondering if you have any wisdom for that.
Yeah, it's painful. And I think in a lot of ways it is gendered. I think
Mm.
a lot of women uh, who, whether you make a living at it or working creatively in any capacity, um, there will be people who sort of try to bring you down a peg, so that
Mhm.
you don't. And like the Midwestern saying would be like, so you don't get too big for your britches. Um, and it's really painful because I think what we want from the people closest to us is to feel like we have cheerleaders. I mean, maybe they don't realize how much self-doubt we carry, period. Right? So like that, any kind of success is so validating because we are working in the dark all the time, having no idea, right?
Mhm.
Like if it's going to come to anything, if it's going to turn out, if we're going to be happy with it, let alone anybody else. So to be carrying around that much, um, just sort of like living with the unknown and how uncomfortable that can be, that when something does kind of hit, that feels so good and is so validating because it tells you that you're on the right path, perhaps, and you're not just operating alone in the dark and sending stuff out into a void. And so to have people close to you, either sort of not respond, not be happy for you, or actively kind of sabotage.
Mm. Oh, that's the
Um,
worst.
yeah, what you're doing, or try to sort of make you feel bad about it or small for it, or like it's yucky that you would be excited for succeeding at something, is incredibly painful. And it's also maybe on the silver lining of that is it's very clarifying.
Yes.
So I think we see when things, like they say, well, you know who your real friends are when you're having a hard time and who shows up. Yes, and you know who your real friends are when things are going well and they
Yes.
still show up and they're not talking behind your back or rolling their eyes at you or trying to sort of downplay what's happened when they can be a cheerleader. Those are your people. And I try to
Mm.
keep that in mind too. Like when something wonderful happens to a friend of mine, even if it's something like, let's say I apply for a grant and one of my close writing friends applies for a grant and that person gets the grant and I don't. Is it disappointing? Yes. But that wasn't my opportunity. And I think
Yeah.
reframing it and just keeping in mind that like when someone else succeeds, whether they're in your field or just in your orbit, they're not taking something from you personally or professionally. They're sort of adding more to that like sort of wonderful pool of
Mhm.
positivity that we all kind of draw from. It just there's more in the well. And so I
Yes.
try to like I remember what it felt like for people that I loved not to be happy for me. And so that also really changes the way that I approach other people's successes, even when I'm disappointed for myself.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that perspective. I totally agree. And I think for me, it kind of rewired my whole brain when I had an amazing opportunity, like a dream come true show in Paris. And unfortunately, people that were not everyone, I had a lot of amazing friends that actually showed up, but I had some people that were supposed to be like the closest people to me just completely start to sabotage the whole thing. And it was a big reminder for me to not. I think part of me was like trying to impress them or prove something. And I had to just take all of the love I have for my art and say it's for me. It's not for anyone else. No one else is going to care. I mean, some people will care and be happy, but not at the level that I expect them to or they could ever understand. And it actually liberated me a lot, as painful and mortifying as the experience was at the moment. Now I'm just like, oh,
Yes.
who cares? This is just for me, no one else is ever gonna take that from me. So thank you for sharing that experience. I really
Yeah,
appreciate that.
I relate. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. One thing I wanted to ask you for our creative community that is, we always hear as artists, as writers, be consistent in your practice. And one thing that I love in your brilliant new book, dear writer,
Is
is
that
that
I'm not?
well, you just reframe the way that consistency works because it's not like, oh, every day, we hear, oh, all the successful male writers would sit at their desk at 4 a.m. and work until 10 and never eat or sleep. But that's not realistic, especially if you're a caretaker or you have a day job or you're a human and or have ADHD like me, where I can't sit for more than an hour. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what your practice looks like now, and how it's maybe evolved over the years, and how to make peace with the fact that it might be fragmented sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that one of the reasons I really wanted to write and publish Dear Writer is to dispel a bunch of myths, not only about writing, but about creating, period, regardless of art form. And one of those myths is that, like, you have to sit down at the same time every day, or go to your studio at the same time every day, or put a certain number of hours in every day to be doing it, quote unquote, for real. And that if you're not doing that, then you're not really doing it for real and you're not very serious. And therefore, we should not be taking you seriously.
Mm.
And that's just never been how I've worked. And that's probably a lot about just my personality. Like I'm sort of like a butterfly flitting around from flower to flower. And so I'm not necessarily a multitasker, but I rotate through lots of things in a given day. I'm not usually a hyper-focused individual. And I've also, for the past 16 years, had kids in my house. And for most of those years, I've been working in this house. And it's not easy to get 4 hours of uninterrupted time when you have somebody asking you to drive them somewhere, cut them an apple, or, asking for something. And so between caretaking and just my own, I think my own rhythms of making things, it's not that it hasn't been possible, it just hasn't been necessary. And that's like one of the things I find myself telling people a lot is like the creative process shouldn't hurt. And if it hurts or feels unnatural to you, it's just like exercising, right? If like you're doing something and it's like, oh, that's really painful, then don't do that. Or find a way to modify that thing for your body or for the amount of time that you have. And I think the same thing about creativity, which is if it feels bad or you're kind of going against your grain, you're probably not going to get the best out of that experience, as opposed to kind of figuring out what feels right and best and most productive for you. And so my days look like I rotate through a lot of different things. Some days I wake up and I'm like, oh, it's a writing day. You probably have those days too where you wake up and your brain just feels kind of primed to generate something new. Those are the best days. I love those days. But I maybe get one a week and I'm not beating myself up the other six. So if I wake up and I don't feel that kind of good absorption, kind of spongy quality in my brain, I do things in service of my work. And that might mean researching places to send work. It might mean working on a book proposal or pulling up old drafts, going back to older things that weren't quite working and seeing if I can retool them with, the eyes that I have now as opposed to the eyes I had 3 months ago. There are lots of things that you can do in service of your work. I mean, I can noodle around on my website if I want to, or start just do anything that doesn't require me to sort of make something completely from scratch. It all counts.
It totally does. And even just going on a walk, sometimes you'll get the
Yes.
clarity or new idea or visual. Thank you so much for normalizing that. I always had a problem. And it's so funny. I was so paranoid when I graduated from art school that I would somehow stop making art as if that was even a thing. But I was like,
Same.
okay, my professor said I need to always be working. And it was, a white male. It's like, you just got to work harder than anyone else. And part of that really did serve me. I can't say that it was wrong advice, but it
Sure.
wasn't coming from the right place. It wasn't coming from a place of commitment or dedication to my craft. It was like, oh no, like I'm going to become irrelevant all of a sudden. And I did that for a while and it gave me good tools. But now I'm like, okay, well, that's not like just keeping my head down and working isn't going to give me any new ideas. I need to go live. And I love the way that you talk about, going on runs or just
Yes.
looking out your window. And I love the term beauty emergency too. I had to totally adopt that one.
Oh, I'm
Um,
so glad. Yeah, because you have to have experiences in order to have things. If you're not absorbing anything, what do you have to sort of give back? And I think that input is just as important. And I also am like a big proponent of taking care of ourselves as whole human beings, takes care of the artist inside us. And so some days that means going out to lunch with a friend or going hiking or deciding to go like take a yoga class or do something else because it's good for you and therefore will serve your work in time.
100%. Thank you so much for that. Okay, I have two more questions for you. Thank you
Got
so
it.
much for all this beautiful wisdom. My question for you is I absolutely loved your memoir. You Can Make This Place Beautiful. And I'm wondering if you have any tips for someone who might have a story to share. Maybe it involves some people that maybe have wronged us, and not to call them out or blast them publicly, but it's a personal story that someone feels called to write or to paint about or to write a song about. Do you have any advice for how to be vulnerable and really share what's on your heart while still feeling safe? Because I know safety comes up a lot. Like a lot of my clients and our community members are like, but I don't feel safe putting this out there. And I know there's a fine line. You don't have to expose everything, but I was wondering if you have any strategies for this part.
Yeah, I mean it's I think setting boundaries in your work is so incredibly important. And I also think, I mean, I would say even going back to like thinking about your motivations for why you want to use your art to tell that particular story. Because I think, I mean, I'm a proponent for write angry, like absolutely write angry, write sad. Like there are lots of great reasons to sort of like exercise those negative emotions by expressing what's going on. But that doesn't mean all of that makes the final draft,
Mhm.
final version of the thing. It just means sometimes you have to sort of prime the pump by getting everything out, and then you can be really discerning and make choices and think about, okay, so this is all the story. What parts am I comfortable living with in the world? Because there is a big difference in my experience between writing, like, for example, a revealing memoir and living in the world with a revealing memoir. Writing is difficult.
Mhm.
Publishing it is much more difficult. Knowing that there are people you know and people you don't know and people you'll never meet who now have a lot of intimate knowledge about your life and therefore other people in it. And so being really careful, keeping that in mind, I think, as you go through drafts of things, say it all and then start to take things away. Like, is this going to make me nervous if after I publish this book, go on a podcast and somebody asks me about it? It's a great kind of exercise. Like, am I going to want to have a conversation or am I going to want to answer a question at Q&A after a reading about this story that I'm telling? And if the answer is absolutely not, is it essential to the story? If the answer is, I don't want to talk about this, but it's completely essential to the story, then there are all kinds of craft methods that you can use to kind of set boundaries around it and even find ways to talk about it in a way that doesn't feel so immediate. I feel like I spent probably a fair amount of time in Dear Writer talking about those kinds of craft strategies,
Yeah.
boundaries, because it is one of the things I get asked about the most, which is how, not just can I tell the story that is
Mhm.
scary for me to tell, but how? Like, how do I actually do this with like causing the least amount of damage to myself and others while still telling my truth? And it's incredibly tricky. It involves a lot of like nuanced conversations. But I think, I mean, ultimately, I think it's so worth it. So,
Yeah. I benefit from reading other people's stories so much. And I think for those who like resonate with them, it's so healing to read the words and the truth in whatever way someone's able to share it. Thank you
yeah.
so much. That's brilliant. And yeah, for more advice, for our listeners, definitely. This beautiful book, Dear Writer, has so many tools. Thank you so much, Maggie. Before we go today, I have one more question for you. One conversation we've been having in our creative community is this, as we know, AI
Uh,
slowly taking over. And I am arguing that I think this is the best time to be as unhinged and creative and weird and messy as possible because it's the only thing to me personally that I'm drawn to. I want to see like people's handwriting. I want to see people's weird little videos that are imperfect and not cinematic at all. Just humanity. I was wondering if any thoughts on this time and what would you say to other creatives and how they can lean in and not, how can we survive and keep showing up as our best selves and creatives?
well, first of all, I love your impulse. I actually have a post-it note that lives behind my desk that has been there for years that just says make it weirder,
Oh, I
which
love
is
that.
like my evergreen writing advice to myself, which is when in doubt, make it weirder. And I don't necessarily mean more surreal. I think I mean more original, like more authentically mine. Like don't be scared, basically. It might as well just say fear not.
Mm,
But I completely agree with you. I'm so the writing and the art and the film and the music I love best is the work that I sense a human being behind. Like I
mm,
sense that there's a person whose actual experiences, actual thought process made the thing I'm experiencing and engaging with. So I want the mess too. I want quirkiness. I want eccentricity. I don't want everything to be polished and neat. I want some splinters that have
mhm.
not yet been sanded down because that's life, right? And it's also like anti-AI,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's the thing about AI. It's like, okay, sure, I guess I could plug a bunch of stuff into a model and it could spit something out. But AI can't dream or love or imagine or grieve or second guess itself or do any of the things that we can do that makes art real. I mean, I'm it's called artificial intelligence for a reason. Like what I want is AI that is authentic intelligence and that is human
Yes.
intelligence. And so I'm absolutely with you. I say we have to lean in and allow honestly some of the seams to show, allow some of the mess to show, because that is what we can do that no robot or overlord could take from us.
Overlord. I love that. Maggie, thank you so much for carving out time. I know you were just busy on tour. For everyone listening, make sure to pick up a copy of Dear Writer, Pep Talks and Practical Advice for the Creative Life, which is so brilliant for both writers and artists. I found so many tips for my own creative practice as well. And I dabble in writing, but it even applies to painting and other art forms. So, Maggie, where can our listeners find you? How can they support you? What's happening? Anything going on?
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, thank you. I'm so glad the book was useful to you. I'm pretty findable as Maggie Smith Poet on social media, and that's my website, and that's probably the easiest way to find me so that you don't get funneled elsewhere, as Smith is a very common last name.
I love it. And your Substack is brilliant too. I'm a
Oh, thank you so
fan.
much. I have a good time with it.
Yes, I love it. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And I'm so excited to keep following along your beautiful work.
Thanks so much for having me.